Call the Selectmen meeting in order.
And I will call the Trustees meeting to order.
First order of business is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consider any changes, additions, or removals to the agenda. Okay, discussion of the village and town merger process.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for the board members for all being able to get together on the same date. So the first piece of our agenda is, basically exactly what it says, discussion of the process of how we want to pursue the merger between the village and the town. With both boards being here and the discussions we've had at our last few meetings, it is obviously a consensus of this board and of the select board and the trustees that moving forward with a merger between the village and the town would be the best option currently for the municipality of Ludlow. There's a couple of different ways we can pursue that. I've kind of been wrestling with a couple different ideas, but overall, it's been brought up that, and this will also kind of apply to the next item on the agenda, when you want to really look at these things in a whole as to, there's going to be pros and cons for every option that we pursue. The purpose of this meeting is really, in my view, to kind of begin look at it from a 30,000-foot view right now. There's going to be multiple meetings to discuss both of these topics and questions that will come up that may come tonight. Someone may think of it later on. And those are questions that at first we may not have the answer to, but we will sure get that. As we begin the process, there's, I guess, a couple of different options. You could always form a committee that would research the pros and cons of the merger of the town. What's the cost-benefit analysis? For example, Johnson, I think in 2019, merged the village and the town. They did hired an outside firm to do a cost-benefit analysis. I don't know as though we are there right now. I think there seems to be, from people I've spoken with in town, seems to be an overwhelming consensus to begin this process. I know from my perspective, and I can speak for our, staff, the redundancy in what goes on just at the administration side of things is a burden. Which also can attribute to an increase in cost. But there are, this isn't something that is just very easily put before the town and then voted on. We would need to find some sort of outside counsel, probably not necessarily the town council that we have right now, but someone that could, kind of help guide us in the charter for the town, because with the charter for the town and the charter for the village, they're very different. One is a little more cumbersome, so there would be some things that would have to be adopted, and those would have to be essentially merged together. The other big piece I know that immediately comes up is there's two entities. Well, one is Ludlow Electric. How that's going to be, realistically, not much will change, but there are things when you start talking about legal mergers, how that will change how the charter reads for the village and for the electric department. That's one piece. And the other piece that, is the tax burden, if there's any, for merging the town. The one that will jump out to most is, why am I going to pay for water and wastewater if I'm not on the system? Valid point. And I'll give you a perfect example. As you know, I came from the town of Cavendish. Water and wastewater, very simply put, if you're not on the system, you don't bear any of the costs. So, not saying it says that black and white, but things can be that easy where obviously we're not going to even ask the people who, may live outside the village limits, outside the towns, who have a well and septic, that's the cost in their own, why they shouldn't have to bear the costs of a municipal system as well. But again, we're not reinventing the wheel by any stretch of the imagination. This has been done before, and has been done a few times in the state of Vermont. Eric, just how many towns did you say in Vermont? Yeah, I remember you said it at the last meeting. There was
About 90, but we got 30 left.
there you go. So my gut, and then I'll turn it back to the chair. Aside from forming a committee, this will go on the ballot ultimately if the board, that decision falls to this board, this joint board. So, with a committee, you like to say, hey, let's garner as much public, you're trying to get the views and input of as much public input as you can, but we also can do that as we're doing tonight. Thank you for coming, and that decision can be made by the individuals that have the vote to do that. So that's just a brief, kind of overview of where I'm at with it. I guess, Mr. Chair, if there's any discussion, questions, we can pursue from there.
I'm going to open it up for any discussion, any comments. Alice? Yeah, you better.
It would only be fitting.
So some concerns I have are obviously the village sewer and the electric light department. I mean, I think the thing of it is, I wonder with regard to if the town owns the sewer plant in the same situation as the village does now, who will be able to get on? I mean, will it be equal for all people in the town to be able to get on as people in the village are eligible to be on? And of course, there would be impact fees and that kind of thing, but would they actually be eligible to get on? I mean, I can see that having a massive impact on development in the town, also individual homes who would like to be on. I think that's a major issue. When Jackson Gore went on, of course, that was a big, big issue. Of course, environmental concerns about sewage running down the mountain and, how much sewage would be produced up there. So yes, they got on. But individual homeowners in the village, myself included, in the town, where my house is located, my boundary and the town and village boundary are one and the same. And I had asked before, my husband and I had asked before to get on the sewer, in that it's very close by. And yes, we would have had to pay to bring the line to our house, but we were told we absolutely could not, even though, it's a few feet away from our house. But I wonder then, would all those people who might want to get on, would it be equal for them to get on as it is for the people in the village? Also, I think with the electric light department, in many years ago, there was a petition by those on CV, Central Vermont, now Green Mountain Power, who had a petition on South Hill to try and get on Ludlow Electric because, of course, the rates were better, the service was better. And so, where would that kind of thing stand? Might not be as much of a difference there, but certainly the sewer. The other concern I have was, this has come up through the years, and initially I thought, well, it would be a good idea. And later on, I have to admit I saw too much power in too few hands, and there was favoritism toward some people, which I think if you have more people on the board, it's less likely, on boards, it's less likely to happen. Of course, it could happen, but I would be concerned about too much power in too few hands. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
I just have one
Go ahead,
comment.
George.
The most recent thing that maybe not everyone's aware of, but the town did get a Class 2 paving grant for their portion of the access road. And at the same time, the village applied, would have been last year, and they did not get the grant. We were hoping this year the village would get the grant, and they also did not. Had we been merged at the time, we would have received money for the entire project. So that is one example of recent history where that merger would have worked in our favor, just so everyone's aware. Thanks, Brett.
Michelle?
Brendan, you mentioned that you've looked at the pros and cons of, to some degree, off the top of your head. What are the cons for the village? What detracts from the village to be a part of the town? Are we getting anything that we would lose?
From where I'm sitting, the cons are negligible. I think some of it is hashing out exactly, and honestly, I haven't jumped too far into the weeds of like what Alice is talking about, because when you talk about water and wastewater, obviously we talked about the costs for users, but Alice is 100% right. Where do we, at some point, you have to kind of, draw the line for water and wastewater ultimately, and how do we do that, equally and fair, and, what is our knowing exactly what the capacity is. I mean, ideally, if we could provide water and wastewater to everybody, that's fantastic. But knowing that we don't have the capability to pump wastewater from the lakes or from, different parts in town. So I guess that's right now, one of the drawbacks is some of the unknown. But that's not, from an operational standpoint and daily, functionality of the town, I think things are pretty seamless. I see a big part of it from the administrative side of things and how, funding takes place and splitting, I'll give you an example. Payroll every Monday takes twice as long because you got to split it between 65 and 35 between the town and village. And, let's hope that we don't have another FEMA event, because trying to split the funding between FEMA when, okay, I'll use Commonwealth Avenue. Part of the Commonwealth, half of it is in the town and half of it's in the village. Now we have to report that differently to FEMA. We have to report where Ron went on the bottom half and what he did and what Ron did at the top half. Just is a logistical and, nightmare from that perspective. But again, coming back to, if this were to happen, realistically, the day-to-day of people, nobody would know, probably. That's how I feel. It would just change, and again, kind of silly that we had to have two different meetings for ARPA funds, the village and the town. Where is this fall? Well, so some of I think it can just combine us a little bit more and streamline some of our operations. But again, would the village be losing anything? Would the town be losing? I don't foresee that. It was different, I believe, when they used to have garbage pickup and stuff like that. But
Village services.
Village, that's everything is your day-to-day services are all going to stay exactly the same.
Andrea?
Thank you. Just want to say so Meredith and I currently live in the village, but regardless, it seems to us that the entire town benefits or is impacted from what happens in the village. So it would seem that it makes sense to have everyone involved with decisions impacting the village, not just the few folks like us that still currently reside full-time in the village, and a merger would make that happen. Not to repeat, but certainly the accounting for two different legal entities, looking at two different books that have to be published for the town, for the annual meeting, for the town and the village. I know paying for accountants to give two different opinions clearly could be saved there. Just the legal for two different entities. We talked about the staff, the payroll. As far as too much power in one hands, totally agree with that. That makes a lot of sense to be a consideration. I would say the counter to that is right now, 3 people are controlling the decisions that impact, it is the village, but it's the village that impacts the whole town because we all use the village. And that it seems to make, right now we have 3 people sort of vetoing things that if the select board agrees, but the village trustees don't, and that perhaps just having a larger single board would prevent these duplication of efforts and also remove more power in a few people's hands. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Eric?
Thank you. Eric Alden, Chelside Road. I think there's some good points that are brought up here tonight, but I don't see anything that can't be sort of figured out. Historically, there was a time and place where it made sense for villages to incorporate. The last village to incorporate was almost 100 years ago. So that sort of tells you that, you know, it's an antiquated way to manage a town, especially a town of this size. More recently, over the past 30, 40 years, towns have been unincorporating because it makes sense. I think there's some issues to work through, certainly with the wastewater plant, but it seems to be that a lot of times at all the select board meetings, we hear that there's plenty of volume down there. So there may be room for growth there. And all towns that are on a system have some sort of boundary, and that's, you know, that's just the way it is. It could probably expand, but, you know, if you're not in that boundary, you're not in it. You know, you do what you've done always. And I think when it comes to the powers, as was mentioned here, you know, these boards have the authority per state statute to increase their numbers. You know, I think the select board can go to 9 without, you know, that's just a vote in-house. So, you know, the merging of those and having the 3 and the 5, they can certainly push that up pretty easily. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to move on to discuss regarding local options tax structure and process.
So again, you know, these were two of the pieces that, when I started about a year ago, were brought to be multiple times, was the options tax and the merger. Obviously, for a number of reasons, some of this discussion was derailed. So, you know, the options tax, I realize, can be a very polarizing piece, and it's, again, one of those, to the contrary of what I said before, there are pros and cons to both of this. And especially, you know, there are pros and cons to the option tax, 100%. Reason, you know, we're exploring at this point, and again, I'm going to come back to, been wrestling with the best idea of how to approach addressing this. You know, public input on a topic like this is paramount, especially in our area. It affects everyone in this town, or anyone who visits this town, in a specific way that's probably different from the person sitting next to you. You know, whether it's a positive and it affects you because, you know, potentially having an options tax of some kind will help offset the tax base, will help defer costs from our huge purchases that we have coming up. But then again, it also, you're being taxed again. So completely understand that. But this is the board's due diligence and the town's due diligence to visit it and go through the process. And if it is a yay, it's a yay. If it's a nay, it's a nay. And we have done our due diligence as a board, because that is what we're tasked with, and that's what I'm tasked with as municipal manager, to look at these options when they're brought to us. So again, in light of, you know, discussing this with, you know, you could form a committee. Ultimately, these two boards will make a decision as a joint board whether or not to put it on the ballot for a vote, if they so well choose. Becomes a little tricky here because essentially you could end up with a town having an options tax of some kind in the village not, and vice versa, which, you know, might kind of be a difficult situation. But ultimately, I think that moving forward, we should continue in this capacity, that the board meet, weigh the pros and cons, what are the benefits for the towns, what is the potential hazards for the town, and make a decision. You know, just to give an overview of what the, you know, I think we all at this point have an idea of what an options tax is. That's basically a the state of Vermont allows the municipality the opportunity to add a 1% tax on either retail sales, rooms, or meals, rooms, and alcohol. And as we know, the state takes 30% of the tax, which is crazy to me, and the town ends up with 70%. I would immediately advise, that can be earmarked for any projects, anything, putting it into the general fund or operating budget isn't a wise choice, I don't believe. But, one of the reasons that we are looking at it as a town is we have a number of major infrastructure projects that are coming up that are, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that can either be rolled into the operating budget or bonded for, or is there options, other ways to offset that burden a little bit? This could be one of them. Maybe it's not the right choice for Ludlow. But it's something that we need to do, at least in my tenure here, need to visit and see if it is the right fit. There's a number of towns in Vermont that have this, towns very similar to us in some standpoints, and you can mix and match in how you do it. Some towns have just the retail, some just have rooms and meals, et cetera. So it doesn't have to, it can be all, it can be one. And obviously the payback on that varies on depending on which option you have. So again, whether this is a fit for the town of Ludlow, that is for this board to decide. And, it would be my recommendation that we, continue with this discussion. Again, public input for this town is paramount. Thank you for people for coming, because again, it affects everyone one way or the other. And again, I want to be, very clear. There's nothing that's pushing this by any means. It's just kind of checking things off and what is the best. Ultimately, my goal, as well as this board's goal, is what is the best for this town, and that's the bottom line.
Thanks. Open it up for discussion.
Wow, I've never done this before. My name is Lisa Ham Greenewald, and I just have a couple thoughts about the options tax. One is that we are way overtaxed in this state, and people have been talking about it like crazy in social media. So you should keep that in mind, especially the fact that today the legislature passed a 14% property tax increase for the state of Vermont, average of 14%. And that means everyone's tax bills are going up, and that means other costs are going to go up so that people can cover their tax bills for businesses. And the idea of an option tax, it's nice that we can do it, but I urge you to not just tax because you can do it. Because as someone who lives in Ludlow, that just feels like you're reaching into people's pockets. It's a different thing to just say, hey, we can have an option tax, let's do it. But it's another thing to think about what would you use that money for? And what would you tell the taxpayers that this money is going to be used for? And you might also want to think about the timing, because if people are being hit right now with a big property tax increase, it may not be very kind of you to add 1% on all of their purchases or whatever you decide the option tax would be in addition to that. Thank you.
Alice?
I'm just wondering, in your discussions about it, what's the meaning of retail? Who could that include? Is it just clothing, or could it include Aubuchon's hardware and all that they have? Could it include Benson Chevrolet? I mean, is it limited as to what retail means?
It's a great question, and certain towns have opted to exclude certain items or certain categories of items based on feedback. Propane, heating fuel is one. Groceries is another. Certain towns can parse it. I'll let Mr. McNamara finish it, though.
No, that's, a lot of, it doesn't apply to purchase of vehicles.
You could limit the purchase.
Yeah, I believe by
But I mean-
statute, I believe by statute it doesn't apply to vehicle purchases.
I see, but would it include something like Aubuchon's, as you said, propane?
It could.
It could. I
Is
mean,
it traditionally
be pretty
what
scary.
is in the sales use tax?
Anything
Correct.
that is
It's
incorporated.
basically, it is a 1% tax that is put on top of what the state tax. So the state has a 6% retail sales
Right.
tax, as you know.
Right.
So then it becomes a 7% because it's 1% on that. So whatever the state tax is 6%, unless we, exclude.
Ms.
exclude some-
Nika, a few years ago, because this has been brought up before this board.
Yes.
I think three or maybe this is the fourth time or the third time. And before, when it was brought up, I think last time was 2018 when I first served on this board. And they were talking about winter gear, equipment. Well, why would we put a local options tax on a ski jacket if they can go to Killington or Stratton and get a ski jacket without that local options tax?
Right.
So you can see how far down the rabbit hole you can go on picking and choosing what to apply it to and what not to apply it to.
Absolutely. And with many people buying online, I mean, they are paying taxes online, but, I mean, I worry about, as you said, ski clothing when there's an option nearby not to pay that tax. I mean, some of that ski clothing's very expensive,
Yeah.
and certainly Aubuchon's, struggling maybe against the bigger box stores and how that would impact them. I mean, we certainly want to keep them in town and other businesses like that. So I don't know, there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, this is a big topic,
Yeah.
worthy of
And
multiple.
would the benefit be worth it? How much really would we be bringing in?
What was the figure that we would be bringing in roughly? It was
3%.
600,000?
It all depends on how you craft it. I believe the number that was, if the town, and this was just saying if you taxed everything, was roughly 650,000 last year.
I mean, the other thing is rooms and meals. Ludlow's not in a great position right now due to the flooding and due to the loss of Shaw's and closure of so many restaurants. And, would it put them at a disadvantage as well to have this additional tax if it's on rooms and meals, if it's on meals even? So I don't know, it's a lot for the boards to consider.
Thank you.
I have a comment, Brett.
Go ahead, George.
I think on everyone's with the recent flood of last year, one of the biggest expenditures that at least myself and I think the entire boards have considered is the paying of the dam overhaul, which the total project is in the 40 millions, and we're responsible for, I believe, 25% of that. And just as a comment that was made about the property taxes, if we don't find additional ways to fund, let's just call that $10 to $11 million portion that we would then have to bond for, we would then have to add that to the operating budget, and that would increase property taxes. So this is potentially a way for people who don't pay property tax to subsidize, at least in my eyes, the biggest project that is on the horizon for the town and the village, as they do protect us. Thank you.
Good.
Mr. McNamara, oh, go ahead.
Andrea?
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking for the unmute. Andrea Goldman, thank you. I just, in thinking about this, we agree that we are in dire need of money, especially because of flooding. And right now, we totally agree. It's going to be paid by the taxpayers. And I think that to have this discussion, I knew what I was going to say. It sounds like we're talking about $650,000, but I'm wondering if that includes all of the rentals that are Airbnb that are occurring here and what Okemo is doing on site, because we probably can't collect on what they do on their Epic passes. But I think it would be helpful to have a discussion or have an analysis so that people can vote informed and the boards can be informed on, what is the potential based on all those numbers, and then what would it do to our tax base? Because I think that we're all thinking it just increases our effectively our taxes and our cost of living, but having this other money should actually decrease our taxes. But to have it would be great to have specific numbers to discuss it, to see that analysis. We're all for a 1% tax. Thank you.
Go ahead, Justin.
Andrea, great points. First, if the short-term rentals, if they're paying monthly taxes, submitting them to the tax department, it will ask if they owe local options tax during that filing. So it's Scout's honor, I suppose. In terms of Epic passes, I would imagine those are good everywhere, so probably.
It's where you purchase it in your home mountain. So anything, if you're, if Okemos your home mountain, those taxes would apply for Epic Pass and lift ticket sales.
I wonder how many are localized.
I agree with her. I think that number is low.
What, the 6?
Yeah.
Mr. McNamara, we've discussed the village and town merger process in a previous agenda item, which is about a 1.5 to 2 year process, requires attorney drafting special language, and it is subject to state approval. So it would make sense to form a committee on that, to explore that and do our due diligence. In regards to this local options tax discussion, as you can tell, there's people wondering what applies where, how it's going to be categorized. A big glaring question is, if the village passes it and the town passes it, is it effectively a 2% increase on the village properties? I don't know.
It's one. I think it.
So what happens if the village says no and the town says yes, and then people in the village decide not to opt into it?
It would apply to businesses, et cetera, outside of the village limits.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I can't hear what
So
you're saying.
it would apply to operations outside of the, so if you fall outside of the village limits,
Same thing with Rutland City.
yeah, because Rutland Town, Rutland City have it.
So in context of this discussion, I think that it warrants another committee to explore that, to better understand it.
Sure.
In my opinion. And are you looking to form committees and have that be the consensus of us here tonight?
If that's the direction that the board wants to go, absolutely, and I would be on those committees and, try and steer as much input and public input as I can.
So drafting a charter is very, very tough, and you have to do your due diligence in terms of crafting the language. Now, it would behoove us as a small municipality, when we present this charter potentially to the state, to say, yes, we formed a committee, and yes, this is what the committee came up with, the recommendation, this is our due diligence, correct?
Sure. And we have, we are doing some research right now on who potentially could do the charter, but.
In terms of an attorney?
Yeah.
So I know we've moved past that, but that is something that I think we should consider as a joint board here tonight.
I would definitely support that. We can talk about, all the nitty-gritty and all that, but really kind of spending some time in committee, opening up for public discussion, really diving into some of these minute details would make the most sense.
Okay, so who wants to sit on the town and village merger?
I would sit on that board. Or committee, rather, sorry. Are you looking for a consensus or a motion?
Dean has a,
I'm sorry, I just lost, we went from.
Yeah, we're still on the
options
taxes,
merger.
tax.
So I didn't hear a closure of the options tax.
Okay. So we have any more discussion on the local options tax? Oops.
Rebecca Prossi. I just had a quick question regarding the options tax. I know, Brendan, you mentioned that it could apply to meals and rooms and alcohol. Can the alcohol be separated and can it solely apply to alcohol, or does that have to be bundled with meals?
I believe it has to be bundled.
Okay, thank you.
Eric? Nope. Dean?
Yeah, Dean Alexander. Two questions. I just heard discussion about the select board and their opinions or vote on the options tax. Is this a town vote or is it I thought it was a town vote.
So.
Some of the conversation sounded like the five of you were going to make an ultimate decision.
No, it'll be a town and a village vote. That's how he said that it could the village could pass it, and the town could not, or both of them could pass it, both of them could not pass it. It would be a village vote and a town vote.
Okay. And, you know, just as a statement that I think it's very important to look where this money would go. I get very, very cautious about, well, it's going to replace your property taxes. When we add a new tax, and I'm not just talking about this board, I'm talking about across this country, across the world, it somehow starts off kind of like lottery did. You know, it's just going to be for education. Well, then they take the money away from somewhere else because they don't have to spend it because the lottery's paying for it. So I don't want to see this options tax come in and say it's going to offset my property taxes. And then down the road, it's a new tax. It's what it is. It's a new tax. So we have to look at it that way. I like the idea of maybe towards the dams, and when the dams are done, the option tax goes away. Not it doesn't carry on, because then they'll find something else to spend it on. And that's what we can't afford. That's what Ms. Anyway, said before. You know, we're getting taxed just out of existence. People are leaving this state. People are talking about leaving. You know, it's just, we can't afford it anymore. And it's time to just make sure that if we do go with this tax, that that money is designated for something specific, and if we don't need that anymore, it's gone. And that would be my suggestion. And we need a lot more discussion about this. I'm disappointed with the number of people here tonight, and I think it had something to do with I don't think it was publicized enough.
Yeah.
And that would be my other comment.
I think once this gets out, that's why we want to have multiple meetings. It'll get out more and more people show up,
Okay.
knowing exactly what's going on.
It really needs to be, let people know what's going on. Thank you.
And Dean, just to your point, the Killington had it, and then after a few years, they decided to, hey, we're good with it. We don't actually want it. So it's always in this town's control to, you know, can always retroactively, or, you know, get rid of it after a time as well. And I do think, you know, the success of this is really where are these funds going and really putting them towards those things that we know we need. And lastly, it is a bummer the state is taking 30%, but compared to what it's taking for the rest of this town, we have a pretty good control over those funds.
Thank you.
Carol?
Hi there, Carol Lighthouse from the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm not here to express an opinion. I do like hearing about public engagement and filling up the room through your meetings. Anything the Chamber of Commerce can do in that regard, certainly let us know. We can help get the word out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
Eric Collins, Trailside Road. Just quickly, I haven't really formed an opinion one way or another on this, but I'm curious in the sell of it, if it's possible to have real numbers. And what I mean by real numbers is most of the commerce in this town is done 4 months a year. So can we drill down enough on this to say, you know, this 1% option tax is really being paid by all the visitors, you know, during the winter time when the town is full and folks are spending the majority of their money here. And the rest of the time of the year, you know, it's locals that are spending their money here. So it might help to see what that, you know, you throw out $650, you know, what is that $650? Where does that come from? And is there a way, and I'm not sure there is, to drill down and say, you know, 400 of that 650 actually comes from tourism. So then it's not really the folks that live here that are paying all that money towards it. You know, it's the visitors that are helping to support the town. And, you know, as others have said, it's no secret that, you know, Vermont has got one of the highest income tax rates and one of the highest property tax rates and one of the highest sales tax rates. So, you know, in these discussions, as others have said, the town needs to do a better job in getting the word out, making sure that folks, you know, understand that this meeting is happening, that these discussions are happening, and really having, as we get into these, having real numbers. You know, what does this mean for folks who live here, and what does this mean for real numbers? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alden. I will say, public service announcement, vote in November. If you care about your state, vote, make it heard. Because we can do a lot at the local level and municipal level, be transparent and figure out these systems, but the state level, and I hear all your frustrations about that, and it's not unwarranted. Thank you, Mr. Alden, for lending those opinions.
Any other questions or comments on local options tax, Michelle?
Can I just like Michelle, a quick clarification? I thought I heard you say there was just a rooms and meals tax. Is there no way to collect from short-term rentals unless they?
Short-term rentals do, that is the rooms tax. They do pay that.
So they would be included?
Yep.
Okay.
So-
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. How we got the 650 back a few years ago, if memory serves, is the state of Vermont publishes town totals, tax totals. Here's how much we gave the state in rooms tax, here's how much we gave in meals tax, sales tax. And then they just times that by 1% to get the total. So I think that's the generative number. And I'm sure that's changed now. That was pre-COVID numbers, so I'm sure it's significant.
And to, points that were made during this, that, that number is just, thrown out there as, a committee is formed and looked at it. It'll be the, the due diligence of the committee, myself included, to, as Mr. Alden said, to have those numbers. This isn't a discussion of, oh, well, this could work and it's a number, we want factual numbers and information that we can put in front of people where these are the cold hard facts and we make an educated decision on it. And that's the process of kind of going through that, and is something that will have to be done as the, again, this is just kind of the 30,000 foot view discussion on it, rather than, sitting down and actually having a presentation and saying, this is, if we were to go with it, these are the projections, et cetera, this is what we can expect or not. So that will be the process moving forward if we continue to.
Okay, is there any, Eric?
Are you legally allowed, or can you actually earmark these funds? Is that something that?
Yeah, so a lot of
do?
towns do, I guess you would say, earmark those funds for specific uses. I agree, kind of with what Mr. Alexander said, is that this, and maybe I misspoke when I said, offset, putting this in, some towns have taken the money and they've used it to offset the tax rate. We're going to put this against the tax rate. That isn't what I'm, or I think the board is looking for. This should be, if it were to happen, would be earmarked for specific projects where we know this is coming up down the road. We have X, Y, Z projects that are going to be in excess of, $500,000 a piece. We're going to put this money specifically towards that. And then at that point, when some of those projects are funded, do you rescind it? Maybe. But again, just putting it into the operating budget or having it to specifically offset the tax rate once that's set isn't what we're looking to do, or what I would recommend doing.
Any other comments on local options tax? Okay, being none, I want to circle back and finish up with setting committees up for village and town merger.
committee as I'm on the village and town boards.
What line down to, Brett?
And
Did you say, Brett, did you say you want?
Yeah.
having someone from wastewater and Ludlow Electric too would probably be.
Absolutely.
At least one community member, not a couple.
I'd volunteer for the local options tax committee.
I'll be on the local options tax one as well.
Okay,
I'll work on putting those together, and we'll,
So right now, it's two on
two and
each.
two.
yeah, just board members.
Yeah.
apparently.
Moving on, review and adoption of local emergency management plan.
We have that, this was told out at one of our last meetings. Local emergency management plan is required by state statute, is essentially, not necessarily a plan, rather than contact information for appropriate figures in the event of an emergency. We had some changes that had to be made on the last one, primarily for Ludlow Electric as well as the fire chief, but that is all up to date, so we just need a motion. And this is actually just a motion by the select board.
I make a motion that we accept the local emergency management plan as edited.
We have a second.
Second.
Open for discussion. Being no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Guys opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, select board to discuss new state child care tax contribution, decide possible payroll.
So you have this document that was provided. We were this was, unfortunately, was not sent to the town for whatever reason. We just got this and have to have a decision made on it. Basically, starting July 1st, 2024, employers are required to pay a 0.44% tax on employee wages that are subject to an income withholding. This is for the Vermont Child Care Contribution. The town can elect to pay the full 0.44%, which equates to $6,050 semi-annually, or the town can elect to pay 0.33%, and the 0.11% would be deferred to the employees and would be taken out of employee salaries. The 0.33% equates to $4,550 semi-annually.
Is this something you opt in once and you're set?
Yeah.
I think we should probably just cover that cost. It's a menial amount of money. And we just barely gave people raises, so this would kind of deteriorate anything that we gave them. Do you need a motion?
May I make
We
a
need a-
comment?
Okay.
When I got the letter, I did check with the payroll department at the supervisory union, and they are not collecting it from employees.
Okay. So
Or at least when I talked to them,
Yeah,
they
I've heard
weren't.
a lot of them are.
yeah, I'll make a motion that we pay the, 0.44%?
0.44%.
For the employees.
Second, open for discussion. Being no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Guys opposed? Guys have it. Okay, that would be the end. We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Guys opposed? Guys have it.